Welcome back, everybody. Today we're gonna have two task sheets to do. I think we're only gonna have one video for both of these. We have task sheets 714 and 844. 714 is talking about catalytic converters. We're gonna kind of treat this like an all data exercise. I don't have a failed converter to put on my truck so that we can take a look at it or anything, but typically the code that you'll see is it's a P0420. If memory serves correctly, it's a catalyst low efficiency code, and that's typically what you see if you have a failed catalytic converter. So if you guys want to pull up your vehicle in all data and look up a 420 or a catalyst low efficiency, and just kind of read through that document and take a look at some of the steps that they want you to take to diagnose that properly. I've talked about it a couple of times how I typically take a look at those converters, comparing oxygen sensor values front to back, and that very well may be what they want you to do. But take a look at that document and see what you can come up with for task sheet 714, and then the task sheet on 844 that's talking about diagnosing evap systems. Now I'm going to kind of run you through some of the things that I like to do on these evap systems. On my truck, I don't have a smoke machine here. That's the only thing we really lack, but we'll just have to kind of use our imaginations on that. But I'll kind of show you my process and we'll walk through it a little bit. So we'll go over here to the truck in a second and get started. All right, so we are out here under the hood of the truck. First, I'm going to start off with just giving you guys a little bit of a tour of this system so you kind of maybe know what to look for and where things are at. So we're looking right here. This is our intake manifold, and that's usually a pretty good spot to find our purge valve. So this is our purge valve right here. It's this round guy. This goes right into the intake manifold. So the bottom part of this has an O-ring on it, and there's a port that's exposed to vacuum from our manifold. We've got two wires going to it, and then we've got our hose that runs back to our fuel tank, or back to our charcoal canister. If you look down here, you see this green cap. This is our test port. So if we had a smoke machine, this is where we would hook up our smoke machine. We can pump this whole system full of smoke and look for leaks. There's some other steps that you need to take first before you do that, but this is where we hook our machine up. There's a little Schrader valve in there, kind of like in a tire. Sometimes, depending on the machine you have, you may have to pop that valve out. This one does have one in there, so you may need to pull that out. So if you hook up a smoke machine and it's been pumping for 10 minutes and you don't see anything anywhere, maybe you pull the gas cap off to check if the smoke got all the way to the back and you don't see any. Double check to make sure that that valve isn't messing you up. So we'll head back towards the tank here real quick and see what's back there. Now I know this is kind of hard to see, but if you look back in there, there is our vent solenoid. This is back actually between the cab and the bed of the truck. It sits in that little bracket right there. It's got a couple wires going to it and a large hose connected at the bottom. So this vents us to atmosphere if we need to. Our purge is hooked to the manifold with vacuum, and then this is our vent to atmosphere. Of course, we have our gas cap right here. So that's another common spot for leaks. But the only other things really is going to be the charcoal canister, which is at the front of the tank. You can't really see it all that well from here, but we have the gas tank and the canister. That's all that's left in the system. So I'm gonna get the scan tool hooked up and we'll take a look at some of the things we can do on there. All right, so I've already gone into the scanner and built out my vehicle. We're gonna have to use this specific function on this and not the general. You're gonna have to build the vehicle to get these output controls. So we're gonna go to engine. We already have our cable hooked up. So we'll continue. We're gonna go to functional tests. So the first thing you'll see is the evap service bay test over here. That can be helpful, but it's kind of hard to get it to run right sometimes. It takes a long time. Basically, this is the same test the vehicle uses to test itself. You have to have a certain amount of fuel level in there, and it's going to basically force the self-test. I have used that a couple of times, but usually it takes a real long time, and it's not always conclusive, so it's not something I used a whole lot. But we've got more options if we go into output controls here. So we have three options. We have evap purge seal, evap purge solenoid, and evap vent solenoid. So the vent solenoid, basically this allows you to turn that thing on and off. Purge solenoid, it lets you open this thing to a certain percentage. Remember, this is pulse width modulated, so we can open this based on percentage. Sometimes, some conditions, it may only open 15 or 20%, or under other conditions, it may open like 80%. So there is some ability to control. It's not just straight on and off, so we can vary that a little bit. And the third option is evap purge seal. So that function allows you to not only control the purge valve or the purge solenoid, it also lets you control the vent, and that's one of the functions I use quite a bit. So when you command it to seal the system, it's going to close the vent, and it's going to close the purge valve. So this allows us to seal up that system. So if you want to introduce smoke in here, if you're looking for a leak, you're going to need to go in here and select purge seal and seal the system, or your smoke is just going to pump out of the vent. So this way you know that everything is closed off. So if you do have a leak, the smoke's going to come out where your leak is and not someplace else. So that's really important if you're using a smoke machine and trying to find a leak that way. But there's some other things that we can do with that I'm going to show you here in a minute. I know the GM world has had problems for quite a few years now with these purge valves. And what they do is they don't seal up all the way. So the PCM will be commanding that thing completely closed, but it'll still be leaking some vacuum. So it'll be constantly pulling vacuum on that system, whether PCM wants it or not. So there's a real quick way to check and see if that's the problem, and we use purge seal for that. But I'm going to run you through a couple different things we can do with these special functions, and that'll probably finish us up for today. All right, we're over here at the truck, and we're going to start this thing up here in just a second. One thing that I wanted to note, when you're using your purge seal function, if you're doing a smoke test and you want to seal this thing up and look for a leak with smoke, you're going to be doing this with the key on, engine off. A lot of times, if you're running these things for any kind of period of time, you should probably have a battery charger on them, or you run your battery down. But if we're going to, what I'm going to do or show you with the purge seal is going to require you to have the engine running, because we need a vacuum source to kind of see what we're doing. So I'm going to start the truck up here real quick. All right, so here we are in our purge seal screen, and there's a couple of things that we need to look at in our data. So we want to see the status of our evap vent solenoid. Right now it's open and venting. We've got our canister purge, which is our valve up on top of the engine. That's at 0%, so it's closed. The next thing, and what we're really going to use for our diagnosis, is the fuel tank pressure sensor. So at 0 is kind of neutral. That is no pressure, really, no vacuum. As we go negative, that's going to be vacuum, and positive is going to be pressure. So what we want to do, we're going to start this thing. So we're not venting and we're not purging. So if this system is closed just because of the fumes coming off the gasoline, we should start to head back up a little bit, just a little bit. if we had a leaking purge valve, this thing would start pulling vacuum being sealed, because if that purge valve isn't sealed up right, it's going to be constantly pulling on that fuel system a little bit. So we're going to purge just a little bit. That's just a tiny little bit. So if you had a leaking purge valve, that's what it would look like. It constantly start counting down on our vacuum. But what I like to do is get a decent amount of vacuum on this thing and then close it back off. Now you will have a little bit of a fluctuation in your numbers, but if you had any kind of big leak, you'd be headed back towards zero pretty quick. But this is basically what the vehicle does to self-test itself. It just watches this pressure sensor and see if our vacuum degrades over time. See, now let's see if we exit back out of this and go back in. We're venting, we're back to around zero now. So that's a really quick test if you think you have a leaking purge valve. Give this thing a system seal and watch your fuel tank pressure sensor. Another thing you can watch is when you're putting smoke in this, you do want to see pressure count up. So that sensor itself can be helpful in diagnosis, but you also want to make sure that that thing is reading correctly, because I've had some issues in the past where people thought that they had leaks and they try and fix all these different things, and it turned out they had a bad tank pressure sensor that was giving false readings. So the vehicle thought it had a leak, but it didn't actually have one. So it's pretty handy. Like I said, again, we'll use the system seal on a smoke test with the engine off. And if we want to pull a little vacuum on this thing and watch, see what it does, we need to have the engine running. But I'll show you this other special function. We're kind of going to treat this task sheet like we have a large leak. So we're going to treat this thing like it has a evap leak, has a check engine light. P0442 is a small leak. There should also be a code for a large leak. I didn't see one in all data when I kind of poked around for just a second. I think that code for a lot of other things, maybe newer cars, is a P0455 for an evap large leak. So for our diagnostic scenario, we're going to say that we came to our port and hooked up our smoke machine. We went into our scan tool and did a system seal like we were just talking about. We smoked this thing and we've got some smoke coming out of our vent valve. Now, that doesn't just mean we have a bad vent valve. We need to test the valve and see if it's doing what it needs to do. So to do that, we're going to use our evap vent solenoid commands. We're going to go back to the solenoid and see if the PCM is actually able to control this thing or not. So, I mean, being a valve and having an open position, sometimes it needs to vent. So if the PCM can't command it, maybe we have a PCM or a wiring issue. So we need to go out to the component and see if it's actually receiving the signal. And we can test that with the scan tool and with our vent solenoid command. So we'll head to the back of the truck and see what we can find. I know this is kind of hard to maybe make some sense out of, but up there you can kind of see our connector for our vent valve. It's kind of in a tough spot to get to, but we've got our test probes in there and we are hooked up to a test light. It's my test light. It's got a little voltmeter built into it, so not only can we get the light coming on and off, but it'll actually give us a voltage reading. So I've got our scan tool hooked up over here beside me, so I'm going to give this thing a command to turn our vent valve on. So I kind of redid this a little bit. You can see I've got my test probes in there and I added some jumper wires so we can see our scan tool and our test light a little bit better. So we're going to kind of continue on through this. So we've got, this is our vent solenoid on and off again. So we have our commands up here at the top, on and off. So I'm going to Hit that on. You can see we got our green light come on and we've got 12.4 volts. Turn it off. And back on, off, on. So we have a good signal getting back to our vent solenoid. So we know that everything, the PCM signal is getting to the vent. So we know our PCM and our wiring is good. So if this thing isn't closing, if it's still leaking when on your smoke test, but you know that you have good on and off commands from your PCM, then you know you have a bad vent valve. And you always want to check this. It really only takes a minute. If you got a lift and that vent valve connector is accessible, just hook your test light up, command it on and off, and you'll know for sure, because I have seen a couple of times, new cars have bent pins at the PCM, something like that, causing various issues. So it's not always the component. We need to know for sure, and this is just a real quick an easy way to make sure that we have a vent valve problem. So that'll kind of wrap us up for today. Get that task sheet filled out the best that you can, and we'll have a little bit more tomorrow. Thanks.